Good evening, everyone.
Good evening, everyone.
Welcome all of you to this first session in this series of Let Us Inquire. We'll have 5 sessions back to back every day at 7:30. So without much delay from my side, I'll hand over the stage to Binal to inquire about freedom. Over to you, Binal. Thank you.
Thank you, Kalyan, for the introduction. So today's topic is understanding freedom. And as I would be presenting to you, I would be co-exploring with you all. And later on would be open to take questions so that we can explore it further. So let me start the presentation. I'll share the screen. So let us understand what freedom is in the context that freedom, we cannot cage it with a definition because that would be quite paradoxical. So when I was thinking of freedom, what came to mind was, freedom would come into place only when we get stuck. That's when we think of freedom. So that caging would happen before that, before we actually even think of freedom. So if we even backtrack it further and see where before caging, what was that state of being, and we come to realize that it's an innate state of as is. So innately we are already free is what comes out as a fact. And it's, if I were to give you an analogy, it would be like that of a flowing river where we are flowing from moment to moment, and in this there is no past or the future. This river, it's more like a unified, wholesome, neutral thing without any opinions as such. This is how that as is state would look like. And you may wonder that, if even a river, it may start maybe with a glacier and may have its end towards by merging with the sea, and just as we have birth and death. But in this context, we are not talking about the chronological time as such, but the past or future is not allowing the past memory, for example, to have an influence in the present moment, or juxtaposing something which is thought of as a target into the present moment. So it is in this context that we are talking about the past or the future. So just a recap to connect the dots, we talked about freedom, but before freedom, we see that we would have got caged somewhere, which is why we are talking about freedom. And prior to that state of getting caged would be a state of as is. So freedom that way is nothing but, nothing extra that we are getting something from the outside, but it's that innate state of as is, which, and the caging that we are talking about is just the blocking that has happened. It's like a river that was flowing and a boulder was put in and blocking the flow. So that's the context of freedom that we. So like I just mentioned it, we are innately free if we see that as is state is what freedom is all about. So one way of, the general way of looking at freedom is that, is it a freedom of choice? We can go word by word in this, where choice would mean want, wish, preference, will, anything to do with intention. There was also a time, in fact, in my life where I was considering freedom with responsibility. I would always say that, freedom would go hand in hand with responsibility, where, you enjoy your freedom not at the expense of someone else. Now, when I was brooding over it, it came to the forefront that here also what we are talking about freedom is the freedom of choice. So is freedom something else apart from this, or is there some other perspective? So let's dive word by word a little deeper, and let's explore further what does choice mean. Basically, we look at it as an opinion, a judgment, and it can manifest in different ways, either positive or negative. So I'll run you through some of the examples of choice which I've listed here. It could look like likes, dislikes, should, shouldn't, applauding someone or having contempt for something, belief, disbelief, excitement, fear, hope, despair, justification, denial. So the list goes on. Basically, it's moving in the corridor of two extremes, which is quite binary, like love in the sense of attraction, like an attachment, and hatred generally. So attachment or attraction is generally considered as love, but it's a different topic altogether to explore love in that sense. So and also this choice is more like an you are bringing some intention into so from neutral state we are going towards the positive or the negative, or the past or the future, where we're bringing what is not true and considering that to be true in the current moment. So even in the context of past or future, it's like concretizing something, your belief systems especially, or bringing about a conclusion, a certainty, or bringing conditionality and customizing it. So truth which was available and common for all suddenly becomes customized by the way one starts looking at things. And it could be from the lens of past or future. So in the when we talk about the past, it's more about the memory, the knowledge, the assumptions that we may carry, and then try to put it in the current situation, which may not be, because like the river, it's always a flowing, dynamic, impermanent flow of life. And what was knowledge which was true for the past may not hold true in the current set of things. Similarly, future, we generally end up looking towards a future with a plan, an agenda, and this is all motivated by stimulating pleasure and suppressing pain. So when I'm in the general flow of life, pleasure and pain are part and parcel, which are guiding our next set of actions. For example, while I'm speaking to you all, I may feel thirsty. I may grab a bottle of water because I'm prompted by the sensations within to, quench my thirst. And the moment so that is the pain where I'm feeling, a need to kind of have water, which I would. And, the moment I find satiation with maybe a sip of water, I would stop. So the pain got converted to pleasure. So this pleasure and pain in the day to day, in rather from moment to moment, it guides our flow of actions. Vis-a-vis that, if we end up targeting, the pleasure, we have that neural capability, and that's when we can go off from the present moment or that state of as is. Now, if we see choices, we find that drop by drop, just as the ocean is formed, the container called I is formed by this collection of choices, which is nothing but our memory, the assumptions, the ideations that we keep doing, and it keeps emerging from moment to moment. So is it possible? So generally, the approach is that through scriptures, they the I, which is the ego, is considered as, it's considered as something to do away with. We need to get rid of the I. That's the general prescription also given by quite a few religions. But is it possible that I will get rid of I? It's like a catch 22 situation. Rather, it would only end up strengthening the I. So in a way, can we look at every choice, every bit of beliefs that every conclusion that we are making, and question each of these. So when the contents of what makes the container called I, if the contents itself are questioned, then maybe, there is a possibility where the I can get dissolved. Having said that, it would be hypothetical to say that, this container of I would be empty. Reason being, we always would have some memory in the form of awareness, which would guide. For example, even to log into Zoom, I would not start from scratch as to where is the start button, how to join a meeting. Those things which we may have learned from the past would be useful in the current moment also. But the memory, which is the more reactive part of the memory, where we, whatever has happened in the past, we end up using that as a reference, as in relationships or in other walks of life. That's when it comes in the way. So that's the context. So does choice create conflict with as is? Now you may, in the previous slide, would have seen, wherein I had mentioned that in future we also end up planning. So you may ask, why without planning is it even possible to go about? For example, if we were to think of traveling, we would book our tickets, and that would require some bit of planning, wouldn't it? So yes. And can we, so it's not that we should not plan, because here we are not talking about right, wrong, should, shouldn't, but we are talking here in the context of, can we hold this tentatively on a very loose ground, the whatever planning we may end up doing. In a way, for example, if I'm planning my tickets and booking some travel and it doesn't materialize for some reason, maybe someone in my relatives is asking for me to stay back, or if there is certain cancellation of plans where I was planning to go, if it's really held on a very loose ground, that if it happens, fine, if it doesn't, it doesn't matter. That's when we end up sensing that freedom. And similarly, but if we have very concrete ideas about the travel plans, that it should be like this, it has to be like that, that itself is perhaps forming a cage for ourselves more than someone doing it for us. We are doing it for creating that cage ourselves. So in this, can we then zoom in into what caging is? Maybe that would kind of throw more light on what freedom is. Perhaps there is a connection between the two. And so in this regard, when we generally think of uncaging ourselves, rather, we would think of first that we are caged, we would accept that cage. So the problem is taken as given, and then we end up trying to find solution either from outside by, you know, uh, looking up to some authority in the form of, your teachers, your mentors, or even senior members of the family. Or we would end up, even from, if so-called within, we may end up controlling ourselves with the hope that we may get rid of this and troubleshoot the given situation. But does it really work that way? Let me give you an example. If we are, for example, attached to someone, and we feel that we are, and that person, there is, say, a conflict with that person, and then we look at detachment in terms of cutting off the ties. um, is that really going to give freedom? Is something that we can think for ourselves. The other way of looking at it is, can the dissolution of cage happen by understanding the problem in greater depth? So what we are terming as problem, is it really a problem at all? Is who is creating this problem? Is something, all these questions, if we keep asking and inquiring into, maybe that would shed more light. For example, when we were talking just now about attachment and then detachment as the general route that's followed, can we look at attachment itself? That is attachment love at all? Is that attachment, in fact, is it really my imagination that I'm psychologically leaning on someone, and then in calling it in the name of love, and calling that as a problem, that then detachment becomes a problem. So rather than for going for detachment, which is more like a solution, can I look at that formation of attachment, and maybe that perhaps would kind of perhaps again would help dissolve the cage as a byproduct. So generally, again, in the because we are talking about cage, we have in our life encountered, physical cage in the form of, restrictions. May it be in the form of curfew, lockdown. Someone may actually be behind the bars and would be, have a restricted way of moving around. We also, even for example, animals in the zoo, they are tethered and are unable to move beyond a certain point. So those are physical forms of physical cage. And we also find discrimination which is based on gender, age, even something like nation, religion. Those are again something that we can question. But for example, visa restrictions to go to a certain country because you belong to a certain nationality. Those are the physical forms of cage that we see. Having said that, are we at times converting what was just a physical cage into something more than that? Let's explore this. Let me again cite a example that I have encountered. There have been times when I've got stuck into a lift, which is seems like a physical cage at that point in time. Um, However, there are occasions when when the lift stops working and it's stuck in a floor, between two floors, maybe because of outage of electricity or whatever. I have sensed fear, and that fear is more like a mind element which is being over and above the physical cage. So when I further explore the source of fear, what is happening is that that fear is the outcome of a thought, which is basically something like, I will be stuck forever and will die. If you see the words, it's will, it's like a conclusion. I generally would, if I were to reframe it as, say, I may be stuck and there is a possibility, it's more or less loosening and bringing that tentativity. But here when I say it with certainty that this is how it is, I'm stuck now, and I start believing that particular thought, it translates into the emotion of fear. And with so if I don't inquire into this particular thought, then that particular same thought keeps forming loop, and it's like a stagnated perception. There are so many possibilities and I'm zeroing in on one or two and considering that to be the fact. And when that loop happens, wherein the thought is giving rise to an emotion, it ends up validating the original thought itself of, because now it's supplemented with my emotion. So that thought also gets a fuel. And for me in that situation would, for me, that's my reality, that because now that so-called formless thought is now becoming a form in within me, in the form of fear, in the form of heart beating faster, and that ends up becoming more than just what was originally a physical cage into a psychological cage. So this particular caging is also like a knack of forming opinions, forming beliefs, if not inquired into. So it's not just about that particular incident, but it would keep on resurfacing if it's not questioned, and not questioned regularly from moment to moment. So this may resurface and exhibit in the form of habits, beliefs, control, ideation in the form of, believing in the idea of success, dependency, insecurity, forming images, and it's endless in terms of how we also, for example, techniques or strategies that we may form to come out of this. Again, a problem, considering something as a problem, then a solution, so then coming out with techniques, strategies, or visualization. So all these are ways where we are building kind of a cage around ourselves with our own ideation. And a commonality in all these different aspects that we are seeing, which keeps popping up, is again the stimulation of pleasure and suppression of pain, because here in each of these cases we are again targeting having a goal and agenda to kind of fulfill. So is choice then a psychological cage? uh, so when we see that that particular concreteness, that conclusion of what was just a part, and considering that part as the whole, is itself actually quite limited in our approach of how we look at it. Just to give you again an analogy of the river, the river is flowing, and then we put few buckets of water and fetch water from that bucket and start considering that bucket full of water as the river. So that's how limited our approach is, because the truth is like that river, which is which cannot be fathomed, it's immeasurable. And then we just try to so-called take a few bits and pieces of information and start considering that as the whole. And then we go beyond it. Apart from considering it as the whole, we end up even intervening with those partial bits of information. So that's where we end up being myopic in and forming that cage around. So this just as is was the freedom, cage is happening through our choices, is what was coming through this. And That's when, if at all, that tentativeness and inquiring knack of questioning drop by drop every choice, how it was forming the eye into that container, can we kind of question ourselves. And this is not again something that inquiring knack is kind of a hat that you don from outside. It's already within us, it's quite innate, as is the state of as is. So we are innately inquiring. If you see a child, it's always questioning. Having said that, it's not a list of questions, and it's not about the aptitude of how much or what to ask, but it's all a way of looking and seeing things. um, and that's when it's more like an inside out approach of looking at things, where perhaps freedom of choice is uh, one way of how it's generally interpreted, but can we also think of it from a different angle of freedom from choice? Would that not be freeing enough for us to kind of look at our inner processing without having to point fingers outside? And in that sense, freedom, it can be equated perhaps with living and dying. And here I'm talking again in the context of not letting the past get juxtaposed into the present moment, and not letting the future goals or uh, and this letting is not from again a space of should or shouldn't, but it's from a space of understanding that when we end up observing our own thought patterns, that it just comes up to the surface and the truth gets revealed. So this particular dying is actually giving space for something new to emerge and to sprout. And perhaps that is what brings about that creativity, that timelessness. And it, even energy conservation happens as a byproduct, because one is not trapping the energy in the loop of the two areas, the positive, the negative, both sides. There is no tug of war, and the energy is freed up in, because there is an opening of, because of the tentativity. So there's opening to just observe the physical inputs more clearly. And you let that natural flow through this particular observation. So eventually we find that freedom, inquiry, meditation, truth, health, all these are overlapping, and they end up merging, because that's what we end up being by dropping the choices, we end up being more neutral, wholesome. We start seeing things again without any fragmentation, and perhaps that's what, that as is status. So we end up unblocking ourselves and being there. Thank you. So if I would be open to questions, and yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks a lot, Vinod.
Thank
So
you.
we can take up a few questions to begin with, but just to remind, we'll be joining back again after around 8 minutes for another half an hour session of Q&A. Before that, we have around 7.5 minutes now. We can take up question. You guys can raise your hand, and one by one we can take up. Thank you. Yeah, ma'am. Dr. Kaur, Dr. Raminder Kaur.
Hello, Binal. You mentioned freedom from choice. So, choice also mostly, if it is not planned, choice may happen in the flow, as you were mentioning. Not freedom from choice, but even if, because everybody has different choices innately also. We may be very much related. In my family also, there will be people who have totally different choice. So that is also a part of tendency only, and there need not be to feel that freedom if we can be just observant and understanding that choices. I don't know if I am able to convey properly, but the choices may also be the part of the freedom if we can see it. Can you comment upon that?
Would you be able to give some example of the choice that, just for my understanding, so that we can be on the same page?
See, in the family, what I understood, you were mentioning that one should be free from the choices, not to be choosy about the things. But suppose I am a vegetarian and my family member is opting for non-vegetarian food. So it's their own choice. We have different choices. Uh, do we need to drop those choices and feel the freedom, or can we, along with the choices, because they're happening in spite of understanding the freedom, the choices are being made by the person. uh, yeah.
Yeah, I think that helps the example. So, is it a choice to be vegetarian or, non-vegetarian, or is it stemming from the understanding that what really is the food, like a fuel? So, more like from a space of understanding, and then, the natural selection of what, is our food, which generally actually is the unmodified form, basically fruits. And whenever we are hungry, if we are sensing it, then we would gravitate towards it. So is it really a choice then to opt, if it's coming from a space of understanding? So also, in the presentation, the attempt is not to, the proposal is not about, we should drop the choices, but it's about understanding that this, whatever I'm calling as a choice, is actually, a cage formation for myself. So understanding, from a space of understanding that how choice is blocking that particular, it's more like a conclusion that's not allowing the flow, and knowing the futility of it, or the fakeness of the choice itself, it drops off by itself, rather than intentionally trying to drop it.
So you mean the choice which has been done without understanding, and if the choice is made along with the observation and understanding, uh, that would be common, and it may feel like that there is no choice, but it is happening tentatively.
generally choice and awareness, for example, they are either or states, they don't go hand in hand. Because when we are going for a choice and we are, for example, justifying it, that once in a while, for example, if I indulge in so and so food, it's fine. uh, Vis-a-vis that, are we observing? Because otherwise, if we end up again justifying, we are again, our energy is trapped in that loop, and we are going in that cycle, and perhaps are even in denial of acknowledging that particular fact. So it's more about inquiring into it further, and there is no end to this inquiry. Like it's not like a place would come where we would say that this is it, we have done finished my inquiry. That would be an ongoing journey. And so not putting a lid on that, and again further questioning. And even if I end up eating, for example, am I observing, even not just while eating but even after eating also? So it keeps continuing. And so yeah, I mean, inquiry and choice are like mutually exclusive in that sense.
Thank you.
We have around 2 minutes to go for the next session. So, should we end this session, Binal, and go for the next session?
Yeah, we can restart it.
So I request all of you to join back using the same link, and we'll have a detailed Q&A session in that next session, actually. Thank you. So I'm just ending this session, and please join back on the same link.